This is The Civil Fleet, the podcast focused on the activist-led refugee rescue and support missions across Fortress Europe, with me, Ben Coles. In today's episode, we're going to speak with Dalia from the Lithuanian humanitarian group Sienos Grupe, which in English means border group. Dalia is going to tell us about the work the organisation does at the Lithuania Belarus border, how it is helping prevent people from being pushed back across its border with Belarus, and the conditions people are facing who are being forced across the border from Belarus to Lithuania and back. People are also being pushed across the borders there between Poland and Latvia, back to Belarus. It's a pretty fucked up situation, and Dalia is going to tell us a lot about it. It's been a while since we last did an episode, so apologies for that. I was lucky enough to have a nice Christmas break. I was busy not being busy, and I wasn't able to get another podcast episode sorted out in that time. So apologies for the long time it's taken for me to get another episode out to you all. If you would like to support the Civil Fleet and would like to help us to continue to platform the activists and the people that we get on here and to give a voice to those who are on the move, then you can do so by giving us a micro donation or a huge donation if you like. You can do that at ko-fi.com/civilfleet. That's ko-fi.com/civilfleet. That would really help if we could help cover the costs of making this podcast, which, to be fair, are very small. Anyway, do also check out the website civilfleet.com for more stories. And I think that's enough from me. Let's get on with this episode. Let's hear from Dalia from Sienos Grupe about the Lithuania and Belarus border and the people trapped there. Let's go. Shall we get started then, Dalia?
Sure.
Okay, Dalia, thank you very much for coming on the Civil Fleet podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I've never had anyone on the podcast from Lithuania or anyone to talk about the border situation with Belarus, and I think the situation has been going on a long time. So it's really good to get someone on. It's really nice to get you on to talk to us about the situation at the Belarus and Lithuania border. Before we get started, Dalia, as usual, I like to ask everyone that comes on the podcast to tell us about themselves. So could you tell us about yourself, Dalia, and how you ended up becoming a volunteer for the Sienos group, the border group in Lithuania?
Yes, of course, Ben. First of all, I used to be a student of international relations, and during my studies already, I was very interested in topics of migration and in humanitarian work. Therefore, I was analyzing different cases, and this is very close to home that this situation that started happening with migration, forced migration from Belarus to Lithuania. And at first, it was my research interest. So I was reading about it in the news. I was following the activities that were done by the border guards and at the same time by the Sienos Grupe. And what happened was that I finally wrote a paper about it, doing an interview with both border guards and the Sienos Grupe. And that was while I was living and studying in Italy. And in August, I came back to Lithuania for work, and that was exactly when I also joined Sienos Grupe actively to participate, deliver humanitarian aid, and do other activities that we do. What is interesting is that also throughout my research, I realized that this group is the only organization in Lithuania that does this kind of support as a grassroots organization. So it ended up being the only political opposition to the current government and the policy that is being entertained.
Apologies, but I know nothing about the Lithuanian government. I've never really looked into it before. What kind of government do you have at the moment? Is it a really conservative one, or is it like a kind of a centrist, or how do they sort of treat people on the move in Lithuania?
So I think it is quite an interesting situation. The current government, I would say, is the most liberal one that we've had since regaining our independence. So in more than 30 years, I personally at first thought that this is, and I still think this is the best government coalition that we've had. However, there are some internal tensions, and because they are taking up some topics that are debatable, I guess they didn't want to take on this particular migration topic, as everybody keeps saying that Lithuania is a young democracy, and we have to agree on that partly, but then at the same time, we see that the migration topic is very new and it is something that nobody wants to deal with. So the migration department, for example, it belongs to the Ministry of Interior, and the Ministry of Interior is led by this minister who is very much anti-migration, and nobody else challenges this. Also because we have such a wonderful government in many other ways, apparently. So it's not popular to challenge it. And I think that's what makes you an outsider if you actually do. And I have to say, personally, and I think as many of our members, I agree with many things that our government does. There are good decisions that are being made overall, and it is quite a democracy upholding country. But there are these loopholes that we see, and especially on migration and on human rights protection of people on the move and asylum seekers. I think this is a huge issue. However, we also have to admit that these things that we see, the government is doing it according to certain, maybe written or unwritten agreements with EU. Mm-hmm. So there are some tendencies also that we see when we speak to our international partners who also deal with migration on other international borders. So yeah, this is the situation, I guess.
It sounds very similar to elsewhere in Europe. Although here in the UK we have like a pretty right-wing government, but also the Liberal parties, they don't really want to talk about migration because they're worried that they will lose them votes and this kind of thing. So these people on the move, migrants, refugees, they tend to slip through the nets, right? It's interesting that it's the same.
It's super difficult because, if they're taking already the issue of LGBTQ community having, their rights exploited and not upheld. So that's already a very difficult topic in the eastern part of Europe. Then also taking up migration is going to have you lose a lot of votes.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's what one of the main big problems with Europe at the moment. That's pretty broad, I suppose. The Sienos Group, Sienos, that's how we pronounce it, I think. The Sienos Group, let's talk about them in a second, actually. Maybe you could tell us, the background details. So I've written in the Civil Fleet, I've written a few stories about the situation with Poland and Belarus. I think I've done maybe one story that mentions Lithuania and Latvia. Because Belarus borders quite a few countries, right? It's quite big. And I know that Belarus has been inviting people to come to its country and then pushing them out to Poland and Lithuania and Latvia. I think they did it to annoy the European Union. Maybe you can tell us a bit of the background of the situation, because there's people being pushed back across the borders, right? People facing really terrible situations that at the border region. So could you give us a little bit of a background to the situation with Lithuania and Belarus, this border situation?
Yes, of course. Firstly, I think it would be fair to say that Lithuania was actually the first country that started facing this influx of migration, even though internationally maybe it's not always that clear. There were huge protests in Belarus a few years ago, and that was when the opposition leader Tikhanovskaya, it was her husband Tikhanovskaya, who was imprisoned. Then Tikhanovskaya took over her husband's role, and being the opposition leader fighting against Lukashenko. And she eventually ended up running away from Belarus, and she ran actually to Lithuania. And their office and a lot of activists actually relocated to Lithuania, which made Lithuania the enemy of Belarus and the most direct one. Therefore, we suppose Belarus decided to use this tool of how it's also called coercive engineered migration, which is the cheapest tool that countries who have no other means of making you act the way they want you to, they use this tool. So Belarus started at first pushing migrants from third countries to Lithuania. But then, since the border, as you mentioned, is so big, and there are many countries that are across the border of Belarus, they started pushing them also to Poland, and the migration maybe was less organized then, also to Latvia, and this whole mess started. And of course, these countries have never faced these situations. And this was very much of a shock, and they started trying to push them back. They didn't know that the border guards and the power structures didn't know very well the international laws. Maybe then quite soon they started knowing it, but since this is actually kind of, as we call it, a part of hybrid war, they started pushing these people back. And at first, more of asylum requests were taken. So people were at first allowed to apply for asylum. But very soon, and the later, the less of the requests were actually taken by the border guards. We also observed it in the recent Lithuanian Red Cross report, which actually outlines very, very well the situation. And the Ministry of Interior, for example, of Lithuania, and as far as similar situations also in Poland and in Latvia, they've been claiming that these people who are traveling through Belarus to the EU, that they should ask for asylum in the legal way, in the proper way, such as in the embassies or in the crossing points. However, that is physically impossible, as probably you know from the other cases. People come they could try to come to the crossing points. However, the Belarusian border guards, they push them away and they force them to cross in locations, and usually by force, in locations that are illegal to cross. Another thing that we've noticed as Sienos Group is that when we ask people how they come to Belarus, so there's this pattern. They come from all different countries. There's Iran, Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, Tajikistan, and many others. Also Cameroon, Congo. We had some Nigerians. You name it. A lot of countries. So they're usually, at first, they used to come through Minsk. So there were even charter flights. From even Turkey, there were flights also from Iraq, but now the pattern that we see is they usually come to Moscow, and then they are somehow brought to Belarus, and from Minsk or from somewhere else in Belarus, they're brought to the border.
Oh, that's interesting.
So we see that, yes.
I didn't know that they were coming from seem to be getting into Moscow as well now.
Yes, because we see that. I mean, we've already talked for a long time in Lithuania that the actions of Belarus and the state of Belarus is kind of a satellite state of Russia, and a lot of the actions that are done by Belarus are approved by Russia or even organized by Russia. So this is just another proof that we see in the migration pattern that these people come actually through Moscow. And this is also confirmed. I recently had a conversation with the Doctors Without Borders, who were in Lithuania up until 2023, so they just left. But I guess they will have their report, and in those reports it will be possible to see that the migrants that they have met, that they had interviews with in detention centers and so on, they also witnessed this path traveling through Moscow, then to Belarus, and then to Lithuania.
How did they get from Moscow to Belarus? Were they bused there? Did they walk? Did they hitchhike or something? Do you know how they got from Moscow to Belarus?
Yeah, it seems there are a few ways. Sometimes they're brought with cars, sometimes with buses, sometimes they're flown. So I think it's different every time.
That's interesting. Like, I wonder if these are like gangs, or if it's run by the government, or like government-backed gangs. It's crazy. That's a weird situation.
I guess it's the classical Russian-Belarusian situation when it's a combination of state and gangs, because often the line is thin or even invisible in Russia between these two.
And actually, that's something you kind of see in Greece as well. Like, there's all these pushbacks in Greece, and there's men in masks, balaclavas and stuff that are pushing people back, and no one's entirely sure who those people are. That's interesting as well, because it, like you mentioned just a few minutes ago, that Belarus did an action. I can't remember what you called it, where they forced people across the border, or they invite people to come to the country to cross the border, because that's what Turkey has done, right? And I think some other countries have done it. But it's due to a weakness in the European Union, I think, because they're unwilling to talk about asylum or this kind of thing. They've made it a weakness for other people to exploit, isn't? I think it's a really sad situation.
Yes, may I give also another example? Recently, I also figured out that one of they usually are coming to Belarus through tourist visa. And a lot of them actually believe they're coming to Belarus to study. And we even saw one website, very legitimate looking website, which invites people to study in Minsk, some international studies. And to be very honest with you, this website looks so nice. I was even thinking that, wow, this could be a great opportunity, to study these international studies in a great environment. And there's so much information on this website. It just looks so decent. And in reality, this whole program to study does not exist. You come to study through this website and with using this information, and these people then end up being pushed to the border. So there's a whole scam. There is a whole system that lures them in without understanding what actually is gonna go on. And a number of them actually, they don't even plan on going to the EU. Some of them know that Belarus is simply in Europe, and that's enough for them, and they would stay there. So yeah, it's a rather complicated situation.
Yeah, and it's really sad. It's really horrible. Like, if there are people who are desperate enough to try to cross borders and try to reach Western Europe or anywhere in Europe, but it's just horrible if you think you're going to study in Belarus and then you're suddenly like pushed and made to become a person on the move. That's terrible. And so I think, this kind of all started, I think, in 2021, I think, right? And so tell us about Sienos Group. How did this come around? I think I can't remember if I already said, but in Sienos Group, you told me before we started recording, means border group in English.
Yes.
So tell us, how did border group get started, and what does it do? What is Sienos? What does it do?
Yes. So in the beginning, when the pushbacks started happening, I think a number of people got annoyed and seeing this situation, they couldn't be silent. So there was a protest that was held in Vilnius, in the capital, and after the protest, I guess, there was this group of activists that decided that, protest is not enough, and they had a meeting. Everyone was invited from the protest, and these activities started happening. They started thinking about how they could support these migrants and what is it that they actually can do in this situation, because you cannot go directly against the authorities. So the solution was to simply provide humanitarian help on the border to the people on the move, and then yes, they started collecting donations. I was not a part of the group at the moment, as I was not even in Lithuania. So yeah, they started collecting the donations. There were, enough people to support this activity and going to the border, meeting groups. Of course, at first, they distributed the phone number through certain Facebook groups and so on, and that was the principle of neutrality, let's say. So they were against the action of, leaving these people on their own and not allowing them to submit asylum requests. And they were trying to support them in any ways they can. Later on, more activities that Sienos Grupe does, more activities just came into play as some of the people were allowed asylum, some of them were put in the refugee camps, and so on. And then next wave of problems came in, which was the way that the people were treated in the refugee camps, or the way that asylum procedures were carried out. So firstly, the migration department is very, very slow with dealing with asylum requests. So of course their capacity is very, very low, and it seems that it's intentional. And then another thing that was happening was that the conditions in which people were kept in the refugee camps, those were very, very bad. And this was even written in Amnesty International report, which actually is also, I think, publicly available. And we have cited in certain situations that people not only were not provided, sometimes decent food or decent accommodation, but also it was very dirty. They are not allowed to go out, so basically it's detention. And now we are facing the situation that one cannot visit people unless it's certain agreed hours. So it's very much like the migrants themselves call a prison. So now Sienos Group, what it does is also try to help migrants find proper legal support in case they want to apply for asylum, or they want to appeal a rejected asylum application. We also try to support their integration processes. We provide them with information on how to do things in Lithuania, what to do, where to go. We also have some people who ask us to support them in their search for a job or apartment, which means we also try to contact certain organizations. For example, now there was a lot of snow in Lithuania, so a number of people are employed in this place where they remove snow and clean the streets, and some of them in supermarkets and so on. So this is what Sienos Group does. Also, even today, we have some volunteer who is going with a migrant in order to help him communicate with a landlord to get an apartment. So now so many things that the Sienos group does. It's hard to even wrap your head around it. Also, we try to provide psychological support. We get some messages from people in the camps who are very depressed, and rightly so. And they're locked up, and let's say we know this woman who has 4 children. Her husband left her, and she's in a camp locked up, and they of course don't have money, and she cannot just start working because she has 4 kids to take care of. And we're visiting these people every once in a while is also just to show them that we're there is also what we do. Visiting them in hospitals. There were 4 people who got frostbite and eventually got their limbs amputated recently.
Jesus.
So visiting them in hospitals and ensuring that they're not pushed back was also our job. Or restoring family ties, even when people are, someone's in detention. We had a father with a couple of kids in a border guard station, and a woman who was in quite a bad health condition in a hospital, and we were facilitating their communication, trying to give them a phone, making sure that they get the information that they need. Sometimes we also help them to not get pushed back by staying with them on the border. While we provide humanitarian aid, we stay with them on the border. We see that the condition of people is, let's say, so bad that we know that it will be very bad if they get pushed back. So we get in touch with some lawyers, and we get interim decision from European Court of Human Rights, so that it's impossible to push them back. But usually then what's required is to stay with these people on the border or around the border for as long as is needed in order to get this decision from the court. And often we also have a lawyer who comes, and a journalist, so that in case the border guards come, we have everything documented, and they cannot say, we didn't see this decision, this was not shown to us, we don't know nothing about what happened, because this also has been the case. So this is the broad array of activities.
So it's a lot of work. It sounds like it. There must be a lot of people. And you said they're all volunteers. Everyone that's doing this is a volunteer with Sienos Group.
Yes. We have day jobs, and we have the volunteering job. We also, have a hotline, so we kind of distribute this activity, and we have a base in which we stay to be on call. So some people are working remotely, and we don't get reimbursed, but from this year, actually, we will be able to provide a couple of paid positions. So we also are an official organization. We got this status as as of a couple of months ago, we got this official status. So everybody's a volunteer so far. And maybe sometimes there are certain activities require expertise and more time. So then we arrange reimbursement for that for the person, but usually nobody takes it, and we use the funding to get the humanitarian aid items like food, sleeping bags, clothes. We get also donations in these items, and we also use money for lawyers, some legal support for migrants. Also, there were 2 cases where we had to use for Sienos Group for legal support, the money that we get.
Oh, really? We should come back to that, actually, because that's another thing that I really like to highlight in this podcast, is the way that activists or people involved in this kind of stuff are also criminalised. Let's put a pin in that.
We'll come back to that. Can you tell us, do you actually, before we move on to something else, do you have a specific role with Sienos Group, or do you just do different types of things with the group?
I think that everybody does everything, but we're trying to structure a bit. This organization, it worked best, and I think often they work best if you're only provide, especially if you're only providing humanitarian aid, they work best spontaneously. So this spontaneity is the strength and the weakness at the same time. I personally, I went and now there's a bit less missions, these interventions that we go on, but I would go on these missions. What else? I work a bit with communication. I also talk with our international partners and try to connect with some other organizations in Poland, in Latvia. Even in Belarus, actually, there are activists that I cannot mention as, for their own sake. But in some cases, we also get in touch with them so that the people who were pushed back to Belarus can be taken care of by them. Very happy to have this support. And I rarely take on integration topics. There are other people who usually take care of that. And I also try to work with strategy and generally maybe thinking about how we could organize our work better. So this kind of operations things.
Well, that's wonderful. It's so good to hear that that a group like yours exists, and there's so many across Europe that I've spoken to, and it's just really good to see that when governments fail, that civil society will just pick it up. You shouldn't have to do this. I think governments, if we're going to have them, should be doing this. But it's always good to me to see people actually filling in where they've failed. So thank you so much for doing what you do. I wonder if you could talk about, what's it like at the border? Is there a big fence there? Is there lots of military guards? Is it militarized border? Is it in the forest? Is it really far away from the cities and all the towns and stuff? And and what kind of conditions are people like when they're at the border when you find them? Could you talk about that?
Yes, of course. So the border recently became, let's say, less crossable. Firstly, of course, because of the colder weather, and because there was snow, it became very cold, and it's generally there's a lot of forests. So we usually call this, forest missions, because basically what you do, you go to the forest, and there are lots of swamps, which is very dangerous. Now, recently, also the government has finished kind of building a border fence. So they also claim that there are cameras all over the fence. We are yet not sure what kind of cameras those are. There are these motion sensors and heat sensors and so on. We don't know how advanced this technology is, but we suppose that it's pretty good. Recently, the crossings have gone down. There are these little gates in the fence that are used for animals to cross. So let's say when the Belarusian border guards cut the fence for these people to cross and then push them, Lithuanian border guards, in order to push them back, they often open this little door for the animals and push these people back through the door. So this is what we heard from people, these stories about little doors. And the swamps is actually a huge danger, because even in warmer weather, these people, when they walk, you start getting cold if you don't have if you get wet. So what happened was that people would sometimes even, have to cross little rivers or springs, swamps, and they get wet. Then, we see that their feet are in a very bad condition only because they had been wet for a while. That's why we usually bring warm and clean socks, shoes, often, these boots, rubber boots, so that this problem is solved when the weather is colder. And if they don't see that there's a swamp, they sometimes even lose their shoes. So this is what happened with these amputations also. There was one young man who is around 20 or 21 years old, who was crossing the border, and I think he was pushed back around 4 times.
Bloody hell.
And one of the first times he was pushed back, he was crossing, he lost his shoe in the swamp. Because your feet get cold and you don't feel that while walking you lost your shoe. However, apparently Lithuanian border guards did not notice that he lost his shoe and pushed him back. And then a couple of times more he was pushed back, and the weather is, let's say, around 0 degrees Celsius. So eventually he got frostbitten to the extent that his feet were just too cold, and in a condition that he was taken to the hospital, and there was nothing else that could be done but cutting them off. So that was, as I mentioned, 4 people in total that had a similar situation because of the terrain. And this is what we have to deal with.
Yeah, that's horrible. And is it mainly sort of injuries like that people are having, or have the people been dying at the border there, or is it mainly like injuries and this kind of thing?
As far as we know, it's mainly injuries on Lithuanian border. However, there have been unconfirmed missing people claims, and couple of situations where we suspected someone could have died, but we cannot confirm for sure. We don't have enough evidence for that. This is something we're currently looking into, and that also partly falls among my activities. But it's very, very hard to tell, and it's a difficult topic. When we get these reports about missing people, we try to send it to Red Cross because it has this mandate. However, the communication is very difficult and we don't get response back. And I understand data protection, but we are not sure if we're doubling their activities or not. And it's very hard to tell if they've ever been successful and if their mandate allows them to investigate as much, and maybe if we should take on these activities. On Polish border, however, there have been dead people. And for sure on Belarusian border, close to Lithuania, close to Poland, there have been dead bodies found by the Belarusian border guards. And we follow, the information that the Belarusians are providing. But it's also, something we have to look at with caution, because this is a propaganda tool of theirs. So they say that, look, these countries who are claiming to protect human rights, they're not doing anything, and look, these people died because of them, or they died in their territory. And, we're also trying to be careful about these claims of theirs. And we see that sometimes we become a tool for the Belarusians to use, because they say, oh, look, these organizations prove that their governments are failing. So it's complicated.
Yeah, it's a complicated situation, right? There was something I wanted to add. The border guards. So, in your experience, how have the Lithuanian border guards treated treated the people. You mentioned pushbacks and stuff, but other people that I've spoken to across Europe, they'll talk about guards abusing people on the move, sometimes raping them or sexually assaulting them. Have you been getting reports of this in Lithuania at the Lithuanian border?
Well, definitely not rape or sexual assault. I'm happy about the fact that this was not the case. I know that, first of all, they claim that the border guards, the Ministry of Interior claims that the border guards are providing humanitarian packages to the people on the move. So far, what we got as a report is that to this guy who lost his shoe, they gave a can of corn, a can of sardines of sort, and maybe something else. So this was the humanitarian package, no shoe. So that also they use force, usually not against women or children. However, sometimes maybe also as well as, let's say, 17-year-old can as well look like 25-year-old in some cases. We also have had a situation where a team of 3 people from our group went to a family of I think there were a couple of minors, 2 or 3 kids, and a father and a mother. A group somewhere close to the border, and 3 activists of ours came. 2 of them speak Lithuanian, and they were women. And the third one is actually a Turkish refugee who's also volunteering with us. And what happened was that they were walking a bit in a distance, these 3 people, distance from each other. And suddenly the border guards came out of nowhere, and they saw this guy, and he doesn't speak Lithuanian. And they claimed they were saying something in English. Clearly they didn't. And they ended up punching them or kicking them in the legs.
Dalia.
And this is how we yes. And this is how we figured out. Way they started screaming and shouting at the border guard, saying, "What are you doing? What are you doing? He's one of ours. Stop! What are you doing?" And then they said, "Oh, sorry. We thought that a person on a move. You can't." We have some orders to do that. Maybe sometimes they even use tasers. For sure, the Belarusian guards do. But this is how they behave, and they do use force.
It cut out a little bit there, but hopefully that's going to still make sense, I think. But yeah, that's really sad to hear, because it's a situation I've heard a lot from different people across Europe. The way, I don't want to say all border guards are like that, but that seems to be a kind of a situation across Europe. I'm glad to hear that it's kind of strange. I'm glad that you haven't heard about cases of sexual abuse, of rape, and that kind of thing. I'm really glad you haven't had that, but I have heard that from other places. I think I've heard from people at the Poland border. I haven't had anyone on the podcast about that, but I've spoken to people there and they've told me about that kind of stuff happening there. You mentioned earlier that we put a pin in the conversation about Sienos Group volunteers or activists being, facing legal repercussions, or problems from the state. Could you tell us, what's been happening there? Have you had legal problems? Have you been, I can't think of the word, persecuted almost as an organization?
Yes. So what happened? That happened around a year ago. It was around Christmas in 2021. There were 2 cases of, let's say, mild criminalization. At that point, there was emergency state on the border, which means you cannot enter the 5 kilometers that lead to the border. So our volunteers were found in that zone that is forbidden to enter, and they got fines, actually together with MSF, with Doctors Without Borders, and together with a journalist. They all got fines. Then eventually they managed to prove that they were there because of a necessity. So there is this exception in the law that in case, there's it's necessary to provide help and you cannot wait for an ambulance for a few hours to come or somebody else to help, and you must intervene, then this emergency state allows you to enter. So this is how they got rid of the fines, actually. So that went well. And also there was another situation when the border guards started carrying out a pre-trial investigation. So a few activists also were found, I think, on the border and close to the border. And it was an investigation where they tried to prove that the activists are trying to somehow go against the state. There was this investigator from the border guards who was asking them questions such as, do you like Lithuania? Do you trust the government? And things like that. So, yes, we do like Lithuania overall. We do support our government. We like democracy. We do not support the actions against the people on the move. So that was the line of questioning, and it took actually quite a long time. Even I'm not sure how it ended and if it has ended, but eventually I think they did not collect enough proof in order to get Sienos Group to court, and the fees that were paid for with the fines, when the fines were gotten, the fees that were paid for the lawyers by the activists, they were also appealed, and I think we are expecting soon, or maybe we already got the reimbursement of the costs for the lawyers. So so far so good, but these two attempts to criminalize our activists, they occurred.
Yeah, that's really sad to hear about, and I know it's happening all across Europe. It's in some places it's really severe, in other places it's not so bad. But yeah, that's
yes. I think the biggest danger for us, and we're taking a lot of precautions actually, but the biggest danger is that we are considered to be smugglers.
Mm.
So we are doing, everything to not provide people on the move with directions. Or not to, we don't transport them anywhere. We are very transparent about that. We don't tell where to go or what to do. What we do is we provide humanitarian aid. And if you're already in Lithuania and you're in our refugee camp, then we can, help with other things. But we strictly, don't deal with smuggling things or people. And but this is, I think, the thing that is easiest to catch us on. And in Lithuania, I think you can get 5 years of imprisonment for this for smuggling. So it's a big risk.
Yeah, and that's the thing that gets thrown at lots of activists, right? They're human traffickers, they're smugglers, this kind of thing, which is really, really tragic. Because otherwise, if you're not there to help people, then these people could be in a much worse situation, right?
Exactly.
You mentioned, I think we should get. So I realise we've been talking for almost an hour now. It's really interesting, so I don't mind keep going. But you mentioned that what kind of work, you kind of already mentioned this, but the Sienos Group also helps people that are stuck inside the detention centres or the migrant detention centres or refugee camps. What's it like? Have you visited one of these? And what kind of what were the conditions like inside there?
I personally have not managed to visit yet, although I'm planning. But generally, I think still I can refer to Amnesty International report, which was very, very good. They visited some centers and they put even some pictures. The conditions are that these people they call it a prison. So we also have seen some videos where people are, moved from place to place by force. There was recently this case of Nigerian people being deported, even with open asylum applications. So that was the situation. We have some of our members are in touch with people who got their amputations done. So there's this one young man who is in this camp that has kind of a strict regime. And what is the situation there is that he is actually provided a social worker, but that social worker is not, let's put it like that, it's not the friendliest person. So what happens is that either the people who give them food this is the center where they don't give them food, but they give money for food. So you buy the food and you cook for yourself. And this guy has just had his legs removed, and he cannot, he doesn't have any prosthetic legs. He's not used to, moving in this way, and he can barely, take care of himself in general. So first thing that we managed to do is to convince the social worker that she has to actually use this money and buy him food. And he has to cook. So the good thing is that some other migrants actually help this guy by cooking or giving him something. But there was once a situation where he was just boiling some water, maybe for tea or so on, and he accidentally poured it on himself because moving in this situation, I mean, he doesn't know how, and we got, we get sent a video where he's having nightmares and all that kind of things, and he's depressed. He's calling our volunteer every day, very lonely, and that's what a lot of people feel. There were also situations where we get sent, let's say, pictures of people who harm themselves, who cut themselves in a bunk bed. And there's, blood pouring out. And just imagine, there's a number of people living in the room. Everyone's depressed. And suddenly one of them is, almost passing out because he's cutting himself. And how he feels, how others feel, I think it's hard to imagine. So Doctors Without Borders were actually in contact with a number of people to also provide psychological support. Mm-hmm. But now that they have left, they were actually our closest allies, and we're very, very grateful that they were here and for all that they did. They even went on missions sometimes with us or even without us. So they provided psychological support as well. And now we got a list of people that we ourselves are trying to get in touch with in order to, just stay there as a friend, as an acquaintance, and to just be someone for them to talk to. Because there's so many things that come into play, and I think this psychological condition, when you're locked up, when, we are the only ones who visit, and we cannot visit often. And the moments some members of ours visit, it's such a celebration for them. So yeah, this is how the conditions are.
It's hard work, isn't it? That kind of that sounds really hard to have to obviously it's worse for them, but it's also difficult as activists to keep doing the support. It's hard work, isn't it, to deal with these people, and what they need is
yes.
proper psychological support, don't they? I know organizations like MSF can do that, and I've spoken to them a lot. They're great. So yeah, that's really important work. I think I've got a couple more questions left, but they're slightly different about, they're not about the the humanitarian stuff that you do or about the support stuff. So was there anything else you wanted to talk about around the border or the support group work, or was there anything that you think we should have talked about that I haven't asked you?
I think I said a lot about what I was thinking about saying. So feel free to ask the additional questions.
So I've just got a couple more left. So what's the reaction been like to Sienos Group in the media or from the public? When you tell people about this work that you do, how do they react to it? Or have you had any attention in the media? I know a lot of groups that I speak to get negative press quite often from right-wing media and stuff like this. I don't know if you have that. Do you have that kind of stuff in Lithuania? How are you perceived?
So I think that here the most important to mention is that most of the narrative in the media is actually shaped by the Ministry of Interior or the border guards. So they are usually the ones who are talking about the situation and providing the data. Therefore, the narrative is the one that they provide, because whenever there's an article, the journalists write on the topic, they are the ones to be interviewed. However, Sienos Group became the opposite. So kind of the opposition to them, the alternative opinion. Often it depends on a journalist how we are perceived. We have had actually quite a lot of bad cases, where the journalists, they first of all, they tend to provide the official opinion first, the official things, which is understandable, especially if you're the national radio and TV. However, then people first read the beginning of the article, and then they don't go further. So often they don't see the alternative explanation. This is what happened when our activist was beaten. As I mentioned, there was this whole first part of an article where the border guards were saying that this guy was not following the orders, not stopping or not putting his arms up, and this kind of stuff, that they took away his backpack and so on. And then when a member of ours commented, they were saying, hey, there was no backpack. That he did not have a backpack, first of all. So there were factual mistakes, and also they did not give these orders that they claimed to give. And we even have a voice recording that proves, we have voice recordings of things that they were and were not said, and we see that actually the information that they provide is sometimes just a lie. And such as, so Ministry of Interior claiming that the Minister of Interior, she said once that I do not know of a single person who crossed the border illegally and is now working in Lithuania. And somehow, I I had been at that point in Lithuania for a couple of months, and I already knew a number of these people who were working legally. And this is peculiar. So Sienos Group became the opposition, and we are actually trying to contact now target specific journalists that we see understand and are empathetic to the situation and to the work that we do. And we're getting more and more good press. So there's now both. But we are trying to, get more of these people who support on our side. And let's say when I talk to people I know, and I give them examples, of these situations, then they start hearing me and they understand the situation. And often they say, "Oh my God, I did not know this is the gravity of the situation." They just don't know because the official information does not give you this impression.
Exactly, yeah. It's the same, isn't it? Like, we get that here in the UK, and I've heard about it elsewhere. But yeah, I hope you get better coverage. It's really annoying. It's a problem with the media in general, right? Opposition voices can often be found right at the bottom of the story when no one reads that far, or it's on page 15 of the newspaper or something. So yeah, hopefully it gets better, and hopefully my podcast can give you some more attention from Western Europe. Hopefully. So yeah, that's. I'm glad that it's getting better, and hopefully it gets much better from now on. And how do you feel? This is a big question I like to ask at the end of the podcast, end of my interviews. How do you feel about the future situation for people on the move there, or for Sienos Group? Do you think it's going to get better? Is it going to get worse? How do you feel about the way things are going at the border?
It's currently hard to tell. Okay, I can share my personal feelings. I understand that now there is less crossings, but the border guards themselves say that there's going to be more in spring again, another wave. However, because the border is so well protected with the fence and the cameras, I guess it's not going to be as many people coming through as there were, let's say, a year ago. So it's difficult to tell, but what I see and what we see, I guess, from international experiences, activists get criminalized more and more with time, and I'm not very hopeful on that field. However, I think that there are means to pressure the government to take different decisions and to change their policies. We would hope. Actually, we were talking with Sienos Group, and we were hoping that maybe at some point we could reach at least having some trainings for border guards on how to respect human rights, how to make sure those are not violated. And, we're not willing to work against the government overall. We would like to be seen as somebody who's a patriotic person who just wants their country to do well. And there's depopulation in our country, and I think a lot of people, young people, also understand that diversity is something very beautiful that gives you a lot of value in the society. So I am personally hoping that with some new, more progressive people, there's going to come this attitude that maybe we can integrate these people or help them, in integration, or just as minimum respect and, support their human rights. And I'm hopeful but skeptical. Let's put it like that. So I think there's still a lot of work to do, and it's good that we will have, more people who can work full time, who are actually, getting paid positions for what they do. And I think then it will be more possible to make structural change, and this is all of our goal. We don't want, to keep going to the border or, providing these things ourselves. We would love the government to do this because this is actually their role. But until they're not doing it, we're gonna do our best to be there.
Absolutely, that's great. That's a great answer, Dalia. Thank you very much. Before we finish, so thank you so much for talking to us. Thanks for speaking. I often feel really guilty when I speak to people on the podcast because I can only speak English. I'm a typical English person. I can only speak one language. So thanks so much for speaking to us and for taking the time to talk to us. Is there any way that people listening to this podcast can find more information about Sienos Group? I'll put links to the website and any social media that you have. I'll put links to it there. But is there any way they can follow along in English to what you guys are doing?
Yes, we're trying to run a website where some of the information should also be in English, which is just sienosgrupe.com. We have a Facebook page, Sienos Grupe. We have an Instagram account, which we're also just starting. And feel free to, reach out. We have an email also in case you have some suggestions, questions, info@sienosgrupe.com that everyone can contact. And of course, we would appreciate if it's possible, to have some donations, and we value any support we can get. And we are transparent, and we'll make sure that this goes to the right place.
All right, that's a great answer. Thank you, Dalia. Anything else you wanted to talk about, or shall we finish the interview here?
I think that's fine. I'm very thankful, Ben, for what you do, and that you are talking to all of us and kind of uniting everyone under the same topic. So I think as the governments are trying to do things together and collaborate and use the same tactics in every country, I think it's amazing that, you also provide the platform in a way for us to work together internationally as activists and as human rights defenders. So thank you also for that. And I hope everyone keeps doing their best. And and we all work towards the same cause.
Well, Dalia, that was really nice. Thank you so much. And I'll be in touch.
Yes, amazing. Thank you, Ben.
Well, that was episode 33 of the Civil Fleet podcast. Thank you very much for listening. Thanks again to Dalia and to Sienos Grupe for coming and talking to us and telling us all about the situation there. I should hopefully have another episode for you soon. Shouldn't have to wait as long as we did this time. I hope. What else do I need to tell you? Let's say, why don't you give the episode a share, give it a rating and all that kind of stuff. That would be great. Let your friends know about it, give it around, pass it around, let people know what's happening at the borders. We need to get more information out there. You could also support us if you like. If you like what the Civil Fleet does, don't forget you can give us a little bit of cash to help us cover the costs. You can do so at ko-fi.com/civilfleet. That's ko-fi.com/civilfleet. Oh yeah, and like always, do check the show notes. I put in lots of show notes in each episode. So check them out. Check out the links and stuff. And I think that's it. I'll see you next time. Cheers.